Hi, Tammy. I'm not late. I'm not late. Did it have a certain time set? I didn't put a certain time. Hi. Don't be scared. Come on in. Come on in, my child. Come on in, children. Tiny Titan Tammy. Come in, little girl. Hey, video reel. Nice to see ya. My birthday's over now, Davida, but thank you. Mwah. What if this was really me? I mean, well, I know this is really me, but what if I was like stuck inside of this screen and this is the only way I could communicate to people? Would that be freaky? I was somehow stuck in a screen and no one could ever figure out how to get me out. Like every IT person in the whole world would be working on this laptop and I could never come out of it. That's a creepy story. Hi, Alicia, my foster child. That would be real Twilight Zone. Alicia, I'm stuck in here. You need to tell the President of the United States. Hey, Danielle, what a surprise. And where's our Moo Moo? I'm stuck in here and I can't get out. I'm trying. Please, someone contact the President of the United States, anyone. That would be so freaky. Carolyn, has this ever happened to you? Have you ever been stuck in your laptop? You can't get out? It's so dark in here, Carolyn. Danielle, Davida, Alicia, video reel. It's so dark. I see some little light there. But it's spooky in here. That's really scary. I don't know how I did this. Do you video? Uh, whispering in my ear. Could you see me going on that trip and I'll just be this laptop? Lexi will be carrying me all around. Hi, guys. Here's my grandma. Be like, hi. I don't know what I did. Hey. Okay, I guess we'll get started. Oh, gosh, you can hear him. He sneezes so many times in a row. 3 times. Number 4 is coming. Yes, you were on time, Alicia. Now he's blowing his nose. 5. Number 5. Blowing his nose. Okay, let's see. Oh, gosh. Number 6. Is he Alicia? Bonnie does that too. She sneezes like that constantly. It won't stop. Number 7. Davita. If you were here, Davita, he'd be saying, "Oh, she gets so mad at me. I can't help it." She doesn't realize that I'm dying here, and she's just getting so mad. Now he blows his nose again. Are we done, or I'll get started as soon as he's done. Davita. How many times do you sneeze in a row, Alicia? Another big blow in his nose. And he goes, another. I think he's done, maybe. He's doing that deep exhaling. He gets so dramatic about it. He won over you? Okay, guys. Here we go. Scary stories. Sit back, relax, listen, and enjoy. And I hope it relaxes you and puts you to sleep. Hi, Aunt She. Big Mama, are you here? Big Mama, Cross-eyed Betty. Now he's making me want to blow my nose. All of our allergies. I don't even need to blow mine, but I just feel like I had to. Okay, this one is called Collateral. Jerry was a flibbergibbet when it came to money. Even his new bride, Virginia, who still had stars in her eyes over her boyish-faced husband, had to admit the truth of this statement. It does, Alicia. It worried her now and then, especially when Jerry, who was a collector of useless items, bounced through the front door of their apartment with some new purchase of little artistic merit and dubious value instead of the item he'd been sent to procure. Hi, Big Mama. She is there. You're always watching. Good, Big Mama. How about Cross-eyed Betty? She said she doesn't know you, Big Mama. Cross-eyed Betty. I don't know why, but she says, I don't know, Big Mama. Moo. Moo, moo. Currently, I'm just going to read now. She's here. Cross-eyed Betty. I wish I could see your picture, cross-eyed Betty. I wish I could click on it and it would show up. I'd love to see it. Okay. Currently, their new apartment was furnished with an old-fashioned butter churn, two spinning wheels, several barn decorations, a cowbell, and two collections of chipped china. What the apartment did not possess was furniture. Jerry had sacrificed this basic need in favor of his antiques mania. Virginia sighed a little, looking over her crowded front room. A time was coming in the not so distant future when she would have to put her foot down and take over the family finances. But not yet. Let Jerry have his fun. They had the rest of their lives to live on a budget. Hi, Leslie. Virginia pulled up a footstool, the only item that vaguely resembled a chair, and started balancing the checkbook on the seat of the spinning. I gotta say that over. Virginia pulled up a footstool, the only item that vaguely resembled a chair, and started balancing the checkbook on the seat of one of the spinning wheels. After a time, she heard footsteps trudging up the stairs. She frowned. That couldn't be Jerry, who went everywhere at a cheerful trot. Who could be calling so close to dinner? Then she heard a key in the front lock and knew it must be Jerry. Virginia rose from the stool and hurried into the tiny front hallway, worried that he might be ill. Jerry stood in the doorway, tragedy written all over his handsome, boyish face. Virginia flew to his side. Darling, what's wrong? She cried. I've lost it, he said numbly. I've lost the rent money. You can't have lost it, said Virginia. It's right here in the bank. She waved the checkbook, which she still clutched, for emphasis. No, I took it out yesterday, Jerry said. There was an antique car for sale in the used car lot. A real beauty. His face glowed with sudden excitement. I was going to put a down payment on the car, and then Harry called and told me about this sure winner at the horse races. So I put the money down on Little Bit instead. I gather Little Bit lost the race, Virginia asked grimly. Yes, Jerry said, glumly, sinking down onto a bench that encircled the huge hat rack he'd brought home last week. And my next paycheck doesn't arrive until next Thursday. And the rent was due tomorrow. Virginia didn't say it aloud. What are we going to do? She asked. I asked around at the Russian grocery store on the corner, Jerry replied. There's a fellow named Vladimir who lives over the grocery. Apparently, he loans money to folks in difficulties to help tide them over. I was thinking of stopping by to see him. A fellow who loaned money to people in difficulties. Virginia didn't have any trouble interpreting this vague statement. Vladimir was obviously a loan shark who preyed on people when they were down and out, like them. I don't see what else we can do, Jerry said. Once my paycheck arrives, we can pay him back. That check is already earmarked for other expenses, Virginia said carefully. Food, for one. We can't afford to pay high interest on a short-term loan. I don't think we have a choice, said Jerry, keeping his eyes firmly fixed on the antique mirror, gracing the wall so he wouldn't have to look at his wife. Virginia sighed and said, All right, I'll go get my coat. Jerry turned in surprise. You don't have to come, darling. Oh, yes, I do, Virginia said grimly, grabbing her coat from the front closet. The couple hurried down the block to the Russian grocery. Move you guys just a little bit closer. Okay, where's everybody going? Okay, Danielle, you're brushing your teeth. Hi, Nicole. Where'd everybody go? Gosh, guys. What's more exciting than this out there? I know you're here, Alicia. My little girl's always here. You're all I need. The couple hurried down the block to the Russian grocery. Olga, the wife of the proprietor, was stacking tomatoes into a bin when they arrived. Jerry asked her if they could see Vladimir. Olga's eyes widened and she put her basket down with a thump. You do not want to see Vladimir, she said, waving agitated hands for emphasis. He will bleed you dry. I am afraid we must, said Jerry. We will lose our apartment if we're late with our rent. It's written into our contract. How do we get to Vladimir's place? Reluctantly, Olga showed the couple to a steep staircase, half hidden behind a shelf full of canned sauerkraut. Be cautious, my dear, she whispered, clutching Virginia's arm as Jerry bounded up the stairs. Vladimir will bleed you dry if you do not take care. Yes, no, you're not chopped liver, Davida. No, I know I have you here too. And I got cross-eyed Betty and Big Mama and Leslie and Danielle and Nicole. Let's see. Here's the illustration. The story, remember, is called Collateral. That must be Vladimir. Virginia patted the plump hand and extracted herself. She took herself off. This Vladimir must live in squalor, she mused, staring in distaste at the water-stained wallpaper as she followed her husband up the dingy stairs. Jerry knocked on the door at the top of the stairs, and a plummy voice that fairly breathed sophistication and wealth bade them enter. Virginia's eyes widened. This was not the voice she was expecting to hear at the top of such a poky little staircase. Virginia's surprise increased as they stepped through the door. The apartment was filled with lovely carved furnishings made of dark redwood. Velvet draperies in rich crimson hues hung at the windows, and red sofas stood on either side of a deep fireplace. Candles stood on every available surface, lending a romantic air to the room. A refined gentleman in a dinner jacket was pouring himself a glass of wine from a decanter on a cherry side table. Davida, he sounds like your kind of man. Are you Mr. Vladimir? Jerry asked as Virginia gazed around her yearningly. Their antique-strewn apartment was nothing like this elegant abode. And Jerry looked like a little boy beside this handsome stranger. Just Vladimir, the elegant man said. He gave Virginia a piercing glance that, despite its brief duration, took in every aspect of her lovely person. Then he turned his attention to Jerry and bade him take a seat on the sofa. For Virginia, he pulled up a lovely upholstered armchair and then sat down beside her. "What can I do for you?" Vladimir said to Jerry. "I need to borrow some money," Jerry said. And then he blurted out the embarrassing details. "Hello, LMNW 50?" Virginia's face went wooden as she tried to suppress her emotions. Vladimir gave her a sidelong glance, his thin mouth twitching in sympathy. When Jerry finally wound down, Vladimir explained his terms. The interest rate was high, but not as high as Virginia expected. But she was puzzled by the collateral clause. Collateral was not needed as long as the weekly payment was made on time. "I told you, Davida." "Do I know you or what?" It was only if the couple defaulted on a payment that the loan shark would be free to take something from them. "No horse yet, Alicia?" "It'll probably be in one of the stories, though, I'm sure." That something was left up to Vladimir to define if the need ever arose. Jerry, not the best businessman, appeared not to notice anything strange about the terms. He agreed at once to Vladimir's terms. Noticing Virginia's frown, Vladimir favored her with another small smile. "The terms of this loan may never affect you, lovely lady," he purred as Jerry signed the papers. "It is your husband who has taken this loan, and he who must pay the collateral, if it comes to that." Jerry accepted the rent money from Vladimir, and the couple left the lovely apartment to descend the dingy stairs to the grocery below. Olga shook her head sadly. When she saw Jerry pocketing the money on the way out. "Foolish boy, he will bleed you dry," she whispered. The loan tided the couple over to the next paycheck, and things went better after that. Jerry tried to curb his antiques collecting, and Virginia saved every penny that wasn't needed for bills or Vladimir's loan payment. In this manner, she was able to buy a cheap dining room table, 2 chairs, and a ratty old secondhand sofa for the living room. Sometimes at night, Virginia dreamed about an elegant apartment with its cherry red furnishings, velvet draperies, and lush sofas around a warm fireplace. The handsome man in these dreams was not her boyish husband, but she shrugged the nighttime fantasies aside to face the grim reality of life on a tight budget and a husband who still brought home unsuitable things, if not so often as before. "I truly love Jerry," Virginia told herself each morning as she sat at the splintered table to drink the watered down coffee. That was all they could afford. She just wished he would grow up. That evening, Jerry thudded his way up to their apartment with a huge wagon wheel, which he nailed above the ratty old sofa. "Oh, joy," Virginia thought, staring at it glumly. "I wonder how much that cost." As it turned out, the wheel cost too much. The money Jerry used for the wagon wheel should have gone to Vladimir. "Don't worry about it," Jerry said to his angry wife. "I'm sure Vladimir will understand." "I don't think he's going to understand myself." Virginia remembered the strange collateral clause, and she wasn't so sure. Olga's words came back to haunt her. Vladimir will bleed you dry if you do not take care. Oh, please, let her be wrong, she prayed frantically. They were already so poor. If Vladimir called in Jerry's loan, they would be out on the street. At least you would be away from the wagon wheel, a tiny voice whispered in the back of her mind. And the stuffed elephant's foot, and the spinning wheels, and the old trombone. For a moment, Virginia saw a candlelit room filled with cherry red furnishings. She thrust the memory away. Oh gosh, I wouldn't doubt it, LMN, right? Yeah, on the elephant, yeah. Jerry bounded off, filled with confidence in his ability to persuade Vladimir to give them a break. He returned an hour later. He was pale and sweaty as he came through the door, almost feverish. It had absolutely not been a good interview. Vladimir said, I can give him both payments next week, he announced, falling onto the ratty sofa. Virginia sighed in relief. So he wasn't going to bleed them dry, as she had feared. Did he ask for collateral? She inquired. Yes, but it was nothing major, Jerry said. His sharp tone forbade further questioning. Virginia was surprised and a little hurt by her husband's curt reply. Hi, Nightmare. She went to the kitchen and heated up a can of soup for their supper. There were only 3 cans left between now and the next paycheck. She had to make them last. Wow, that's not very much, is it? Let me get a sip. Taking in her husband's pale, drooping figure, she recklessly pulled out the last of the bread and made toast to go with the soup. No soup for you. Jerry obviously needed something to perk him up. Vladimir must have really raked him over the coals. Jerry must have scraped together the money for the double payment the following week because he didn't mention Vladimir again. Still, Virginia worried about her husband. Over the course of the next month, he aged dramatically. Streaks of gray appeared in his curly blonde hair, and his face grew haggard and lined, as if he was in constant pain. Jerry's one lively step became heavy and faltering. Once, he almost fainted in the bathroom while preparing for bed. One evening, as Virginia did laundry, she found blood on his shirt. Alarmed, she raced into the bedroom with the bloody shirt. Jerry laughed at her troubled face and told her he had cut himself shaving. I think you should see a doctor, Virginia told her husband, but he refused. I'm fine, honey, he said. I'm fine, honey, he said in the same sharp tone he'd used when she'd asked about the collateral, and that put an end to the conversation. 2 nights later, Jerry lurched in the door after work and collapsed against the huge hat rack, gasping with the effort of climbing the stairs. Hearing the thump, Virginia raced from the kitchen and stared aghast at her pale, shaking husband. Jerry, she screamed, running to catch him as he slid to the floor. Floor, giggling madly. There was no color in his face and neck, and even his hands seemed translucent. That devil really did bleed me dry, Jerry rasped. Staring up into his frantic wife's face, with a shaking hand, he pulled aside his collar, and Virginia stared in horror at two puncture holes in the side of her husband's neck. Suddenly, Jerry gasped, and his body arched in a brief spasm of pain. And just like that, Jerry was gone. Dear God in heaven, Virginia thought, staring at her dead husband, who had been drained of every drop of blood he possessed. Vladimir the loan shark is a vampire. In that moment of horror, a knock sounded on the front door. A plumy, sophisticated voice called through the door. My dear Virginia, may I come in? We need to discuss the collateral on your loan. The end. Yes, happy Cinco de Mayo. Cinco de Mayo. So that was a little good. That was kind of good. Need tequila. Chapter 18, Prison Break. Callahan was huddled in a cavern near the Pacific Ocean when the feds closed in. There were still shreds of human flesh under his fingernails. Ooh. When the serial killer surrendered to the inevitable capture, the feds could put him behind bars. The feds could put him behind bars. He vowed as they dragged him down the narrow path toward the waiting cars, but he would escape. And then they'd be sorry. Callahan lashed out at the nearest officer, landing a crippling blow on his kneecap. The remaining men knocked him to the ground and bound his feet and hands to ensure his cooperation. Callahan was sentenced to a lonely prison for the criminally insane. His only companions, the wardens and fellow madmen. Over the next 17 years, Callahan spent every spare second planning his escape. He studied every weakness in the prison system. He knew the movement of every guard. He spent several years contriving to get a ground floor cell so he could dig his way out. That plan nearly succeeded until he reached bedrock a few feet below the cell floor. With every failed plan, Callahan's anger grew. He would escape this wretched cell if it killed him, and then he would track down the men who had captured him, kill them, and roast their bodies over an open fire, perhaps in the very cave in which he had been caught. Yes, that would be a fitting revenge. Gosh, I guess he does want some revenge. As the years passed, Callahan noticed that one elderly prisoner, Old Ben, had become the general handyman and undertaker around the remote prison. It was Old Ben's job to put deceased prisoners into a pine coffin where they lay overnight in the prison chapel. Good, Danielle. It's making me sleepy too, with the dark and everything. Hey, Sassy Darcy. Beep, beep. You can hear his TV, Nicole. I thought it was set to where you couldn't really hear the background noise too much. I thought it was doing that before on Carolyn's. I hope it's not too bad. Okay, let's see. Oh, let's see. Okay, I got to start over with that. As the years passed, Callahan noticed that one elderly prisoner, Old Ben, oh, okay, Nicole, had become the general handyman and undertaker around the remote prison. It was Old Ben's job to put deceased prisoners into a pine coffin where they lay overnight in the prison chapel. The next morning, Old Ben and the warden would ride out to the cemetery a mile or so outside the prison gates. Together, they would carry the coffin to the grave site and lower it within. Then the warden returned to the prison for his morning coffee, leaving Old Ben to bury the deceased. Old Ben, Old Ben was the logical choice for such burial duty. He was far too old and rickety to try to escape into the wilderness. The warden could leave him to it, knowing that Old Ben would faithfully return to the prison when his job was finished. Callahan could use an ally like Old Ben. Oh, yes. Old Ben could sneak him out of the prison if anyone could. So Callahan befriended the handyman, listening to his long winded rambling. He even helped the handyman with his chores. Once this friendship was firmly established, Callahan tried to gain the old man's sympathies. He spoke longingly of his desire to see his old home and visit his aged mother, who in truth was Callahan's first victim. He described his successful son, who was victim number 2, and his lovely daughter, victim 3, and how he had never seen his non existent grandchildren. Old Ben was swayed by the serial killer's heart wrenching stories. When Callahan spoke of the plan he devised to win his freedom, Old Ben was ready to assist in any way he could. Callahan's plan was simple. The next time a prisoner passed away, he would creep into the chapel after dark and slip into the coffin with the dead body. In the morning, the warden and Old Ben would take the coffin out of the prison to the cemetery to bury the deceased. As soon as the warden left, Old Ben would open the coffin and let Callahan out, with no one the wiser. It was a brilliant plan, and Old Ben agreed to help the murderer gain his freedom. Here's your horse, a horse, Alicia. Wait, where is it? Shorty's relative. Yeah, the coffin. LMN. Hi, Tina Bina. Is it Alicia? I don't remember, and I loved that movie too. And I can't even remember. Prison break. Unfortunately, the prisoners were very healthy that summer and through the long, colorful autumn that followed. No one caught so much as a chill, and the new year came with no prisoner fatalities in more than 8 months. Yes, Alicia. Oh, excuse me, guys. Oh, let's see. It set a new prison record. The warden was praised for this new record, and Callahan was infuriated by it. Day after day, he listened for the bell that tolled whenever a prisoner died, but it did not ring. Callahan was tempted to expedite matters by killing someone with his bare hands. But such an action, if discovered, would mean solitary confinement for the serial killer, and he would be unable to enact his brilliant plan. So he waited and waited. It was late February when the expected bell tolled dolefully through the prison. Snow was falling in the yard where Callahan marched with his fellow prisoners during their daily exercise routine when the bell rang. "I wonder who it is this time," muttered a burly man just ahead of Callahan. The serial killer, hands shaking with joy, could care less who it was. It's supposed to be couldn't care less. Even in this book, they wrote it wrong. Couldn't care less who it was. The time had come. Tomorrow he would be free. It was the longest afternoon Callahan had spent at the prison, waiting for the moment he was locked in for the night. Once the floor was clear of wardens, he broke out of his cell and moved like a shadow down the hall, hearing the snores of his fellow inmates for the last time. Callahan entered the dark chapel and felt his way to the front. Yes, there was a coffin standing on top of two pine benches. "Hi, staff. Don't get too scared." He lifted the lid, and the smell of embalming chemicals filled his nostrils. He jerked back a little. Old Ben had done his job well. Callahan groped his way inside the coffin and lay down on top of the inert mass inside. Then he closed the lid. Ugh, ugh. As he lay in the coffin, waiting for dawn, the serial killer felt his skin begin to crawl. He'd killed more than 25 people in his life without qualm or remorse, but this death watch made him itch all over. His heart pounded with fear of death, with fear of what came after death. What if there was nothing? What if there was something far worse than nothing? The chemical smell of the corpse below made Callahan's stomach roil. Only the determination of 17 years of planning kept him in the coffin. It would soon be over. In the morning, he would be free of this foul air and of his rotting companion. Old Ben would free him as soon as the warden was gone. Old Ben would never let down his friend, in quotes. Callahan must have dozed off toward dawn in spite of his grisly companion. He was jolted awake in the complete darkness within the foul-smelling box when the coffin was lifted off the pine benches. He heard mumbled voices overhead. Old Ben and the warden must be moving the coffin to the waiting pony cart. Callahan shivered as the cold February air encompassed the coffin. The temperature decreased dramatically, and he cursed himself for not remembering his coat. The cold would make it more difficult to escape into the wintry woods surrounding the prison, but if he stuck to the road, Callahan would find a house to break into before too long, even in this remote place. Tina. I know, Steph, it is gross, isn't it? The constant shaking of the coffin increased his nausea, but Callahan forced down the bile in his throat. Almost free, almost free. He chanted the words silently in his mind, ignoring the foul smell emanating from his dead companion. Finally, the cart stopped, and the coffin was lifted down. Callahan felt a thump as it landed in the bottom of the grave. His heart thudded with joy. Now was his moment. Now the warden would leave old Ben to fill in the grave while he went back to the prison to have his morning coffee. Instead, something thudded onto the lid of the coffin just over Callahan's head. He strained his eyes against the pitch darkness of the coffin. Was the warden saying last words over the body? Was he throwing a bit of symbolic dirt onto the coffin? But the thudding continued unabated, and Callahan's heart pounded in sudden fear. They were burying the coffin with him in it. How could that be? Maybe the warden had stayed to help old Ben? That was the answer. Old Ben was rather frail, and the warden was helping him. Old Ben would make some excuse and come back to free Callahan after the warden went in for his morning coffee. The thudding grew fainter as the grave filled in above Callahan. After a few minutes, the foul air inside the coffin grew thin and hot, and the chemical smell was overwhelming. Callahan vomited all over his clothes before he could stop himself. When he rid himself of the contents of his stomach, Callahan pounded the lid of the coffin and shouted, "Come on, old Ben. Kill the warden if you must. Hurry up, you." Callahan cursed the old man in the foulest barracks language he knew, and then coughed in the thin air, which reeked of embalming fluid and vomit. Oh, that is disgusting. Hi, Adventures with Beth. Welcome, welcome. Callahan took shallow breaths, trying to conserve his air. Panic roiled within his gut, and his whole body began to shake. The silence around him was the silence of the grave, stark and unbending and full of menace. Callahan frantically scratched at the lid above him until his fingernails split and drops of blood rained down in his face. He twisted and turned against the stiffening corpse, screaming, "Come on, old Ben, let me out, I beg you." The final word ended in a panicked sob. The answering silence was deafening. Callahan's ears rang with it. He swallowed down more bile. The air in the coffin was stifling hot, and he was growing dizzy from lack of oxygen. He could hardly think straight. The smell of embalming fluid and rot filled his nostrils and filled his brain, filled his whole world. A horrifying thought struck Callahan, bringing him back to full consciousness in a moment of tingling terror that tightened every muscle in his body. What if old Ben was not coming to his rescue? What if... Callahan fumbled in his pocket and removed a match with trembling hands. It took Callahan 3 tries to light it. In the sudden flickering brightness, the serial killer turned his head and looked over his shoulder into the pale, dead face of old Ben. Oh my goodness. Did you guys get that? Old Ben is the dead body in there that he's in the coffin with, the guy that was supposed to help him. That was a good one. Leslie. Oh, Karen. I'm just laughing, Lex, at some of the emojis people put up. Leslie, she's all, ooh. I don't think I have a Ben at my house. You didn't like it, Alicia? I liked it. You didn't like it? You knew it, Davita? Really? Wow, see, that didn't even dawn on me. Usually I can, I know that, but not this time, so it was a surprise to me. Now we have chapter 19, Bloody Mary's Mirror. Lex, have you ever heard of Bloody Mary? Lexi, have you ever heard of Bloody Mary? I thought you would have. I was antique shopping in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, when I saw a small hand mirror tucked away on a back shelf of a creepy old barn. A creaky old barn, not creepy. Okay, Alicia. Davita said hi, Lex. She said hi. It was blackened with age, about 9 inches long and 4 wide, with an applied cast and chased border. Probably 18th century Dutch, my collector's eye gauged. The mirror, which was shaped like an elongated 3-leaf clover, was obviously the lone survivor of a lady's fine toilette set. Or toilet set. I'll say toilet. Really, Steph? I picked the mirror up and discovered it was heavier than it appeared. I realized that the mirror was solid silver underneath the tarnish. What a find. Right, there is, Elman. I carried the mirror to the front of the barn where a plump, middle-aged woman in a cap and long skirt sat minding the register. Oh, I bet she's Amish. Like you. Yeah. I bet she is, Elman. When I placed the hand mirror on the counter, the woman's eyes widened. Fancy you finding that old thing, she said to me. It's been handed down in my brother-in-law's family for more generations than I care to count. She named a price far lower than I estimated the mirror would be worth once it was cleaned up. So I handed her my credit card. As she rang up the charge, the woman reminisced. They call it the Gansmuller mirror. There's an old family legend attached to the mirror. It's just a lot of fairy tale nonsense to my mind. But I know you antiques collectors love a good story. What is the story? I asked eagerly. The woman measured out some tape and secured the tissue paper around the mirror. Then she said, the mirror once belonged to a woman named Mary Gansmuller, who was burned as a witch in the late 1700s. She watched me expectantly. I frowned. A witch named Mary Gansmuller? It rang a faint bell in my mind, but the knowledge eluded me. Probably Davida. The plump farm wife gave me another hint. Frau Gansmuller is said to have used this mirror in her black magic spells. It was one of 3 mirrors she had in her possession. 2 were smashed by the angry mob that burned her at the stake. This 3rd mirror was found at the bottom of an old herb basket that Frau Gansmuller used to carry around the village. One morning, she left the basket with my brother-in-law's. Wait. One morning, she left the basket with my brother-in-law's many times great-grandmother, who was her cousin. She asked her cousin to watch over its contents should anything happen to her. Frau Gansmuller had some presentiment. Oh, had some, that's a weird word, had some presentiment that she was going to die. How horrible for her, I said, with a shiver. Not really, the woman replied. Frau Gansmuller was just as evil as the villagers claimed. She murdered several young children. Oh gosh, Mittens, you just scared me jumping up here. She murdered several young children and used their blood to make herself young again. With her dying breath, she is said to have laid a terrible curse over every mirror that was ever made. That's when I realized who Frau Gansmuller was. My eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. You were saying this mirror was once owned by Bloody Mary? We don't use that name in our house, the woman said primly, pursing her lips in disapproval. I apologized and begged her to continue the story. That's it, really, she said, putting the wrapped mirror into a shopping bag and handing it to me. My brother-in-law didn't tell me the whole story. He knows I don't hold with hocus pocus. I felt rather let down by this feeble ending to such a dramatic tale. Still, I thanked the woman and carried the mirror to my car, marveling at my lucky find. I spent the whole day exploring antique shops and then had a late supper at a wonderful Pennsylvania Dutch restaurant, where I gorged myself on shoe fly pie. Feeling a bit bloated, I drove home and rustled my many packages through my front door. Good Lord, said my husband, coming out of his study to help me with my purchases. I think you bought every antique in the county. Pretty close, I said. One by one, I uncovered my treasures and showed them to my patient spouse. Thomas had no interest in anything older than last week. Still, his eyes lit up when I pulled the antique hand mirror out of the shopping bag and unwrapped the tissue paper. I think it's solid silver, I told him, and it has this crazy story attached to it. I told him about Frau Gansmuller and the curse. So you bought Bloody Mary's mirror? He asked with a grin. How brave of you. Taking it from my hand, he studied the mirror from every angle. I've got some silver polish in my study. I can shine it up real nice. He vanished into his study with the mirror and left me blissfully unpacking the rest of my treasures in the living room. There's the mirror. Don't be scared. Don't be scared. "20 minutes later, I heard Thomas shriek from inside his study. My husband never raised his voice for anything less than an emergency, so I raced into the room, expecting anything from a broken arm to a fire. I found Thomas leaning heavily against his desk and the half-polished hand mirror on the floor, its unbroken glass brilliantly reflecting the overhead light. What's wrong? Are you ill? I gasped, clutching his shoulder in concern. I could feel Thomas shaking under my hand. That thing, Thomas gasped, gesturing down at the mirror. For a moment, I thought someone was looking at me out of the mirror. He shuddered all over and turned his back on the glittering object at our feet. Davita. Mittens. Mittens. Stop. Mittens. Be good. Okay, sorry, guys. I stared at the hand mirror and then at my level headed, unimaginative husband. What in the world? Tiny hairs prickled all along my arms, and the flesh just about above my elbows grew cold. The smell of silver polish wafting through the air broke the spell. My nose twitched at the scent, and I sneezed. The mood in the room shifted from fear to farce, and Thomas gave a shaky laugh. I'm sure it was all my imagination. Darn that woman for telling you such a silly tale. He handed me his pocket handkerchief, and I wiped my nose with a grin. I'll finish polishing it in a jiffy, he said in a normal tone. He grabbed polish, cloths, and the mirror and followed me back into the living room. I want to see the rest of your purchases, he said amiably, settling down into his rocking chair by the fireplace. I glanced at him sharply. His tone was normal, but his hands still shook as he took up the mirror and started polishing another tarnished section. Obviously, the incident with the mirror had shaken my husband more than he was willing to admit. Thomas had zero interest in antiques. The clover-shaped hand mirror was absolutely lovely once it was polished. It sparkled in the firelight, and you could see all the lovely flowers and ornamentation framing the sides and pistol-shaped handle. Thank you, Heart Made Wise. It's over, but thank you. Appreciate it. We should hang it on the living room wall by the door, I suggested. You could make a bracket for it. Thomas, who loved to carve, agreed at once. He pulled out paper and pencil and started sketching a small hanging bracket ornamented with 3-leaf clovers and flowers to complement the mirror. His unexpected fright in the study was completely forgotten. Yeah, it's the 4th. May the 4th be with you. Thank you, girls. Steph, Beth, Leslie, everybody. Every single one of you. Thank you. At this age, you're just happy to have another one. You know, happy to get another birthday. I paused often over the next few days to admire my new purchase hanging in its lovely carved bracket on the living room wall. Whenever I gazed into the hand mirror, I felt younger and much prettier. Much prettier than anyone, except Thomas imagined me to be. My wrinkles seemed to vanish in its silvery depths, and time moved backward by several decades. Instead of an empty nester, I was a young bride again, just moving into my first house with my handsome husband. In other ways, things weren't going particularly well in our house. The bathroom and bedroom mirrors were behaving strangely. Whenever I looked into them, I saw shapes moving at the edge of my vision, but when I turned my head, nothing was there. Sometimes, when I was alone in the house, I heard a humming sound, and the air seemed to shimmer inside the living room. It was creepy. The first time this happened, our cat rose up, spitting from his accustomed place on the back of the couch and ran outside through the cat door in the kitchen. He refused to come back inside. Thomas had to leave cat food out on the back patio so he wouldn't starve. About a week after I brought home the mirror, I was walking down the hall to the master bedroom when I saw a flatback shadow outlined against the wall to my right. It was the silhouette of a tall, angular woman with one hand outstretched toward me. I screamed, pressing myself against the opposite wall and flinging up my hands to ward off the black figure. Thomas burst out of his study with an answering shout, and the shadow vanished immediately. I burst into tears, and Thomas swept me into his arms as I tried incoherently to explain the unexplainable. The next morning, I heard Thomas curse in the bathroom of our master suite, and the electric razor abruptly turned off. I hurried over to see what was wrong and found him dabbing at a scratch down his left cheek. Darn razor, cut me, he said, holding toilet paper against his cheek to stop the bleeding. But it's a safety razor, I said, staring in shock at my bleeding husband. How could it cut you? When Thomas removed the toilet paper, I saw two bloody vertical lines running from cheekbone to chin. It looked as if something had clawed him. I glanced into the brightly lit mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw a pair of black eyes glaring back at me. I gasped, and Thomas quickly looked up from his bloody tissue, but the mirror was empty. Dear God, I must be going crazy, I thought, my knees weak with shock. I mumbled something about fetching the first aid kit and ran out of the bathroom. As I passed the dressing table, I glanced into the mirror and saw a black shadow figure encased in flames looming behind me. I whirled with a shriek of terror. There was nothing between me and the bed, but I could feel an invisible menace shimmering in the air in front. The sensation pulsed along my skin, sending icy chills through my blood and raising goosebumps all over my body. Go away, I screamed. Go away. Thomas leapt from the bathroom, his cheek still bleeding freely. But I was already fleeing down the hallway, trying to get away from the black menace. One thought dominated my terrified mind. I had to get that horrible antique hand mirror out of my house right now. Right now, before Bloody Mary killed us both. All around me, I could hear someone laughing. It was a high-pitched, evil cackle with crackle of flames behind it. I rounded the corner and burst into the living room. The clover-shaped mirror was directly in front of me. It looked as large as a building to my nerve-frazzled eyes, as if it covered the whole world. I saw a lovely face in the mirror. It was my face, looking just as it had the day I was married. My fear faded into a dazed euphoria. I walked toward the mirror, my eyes fixed on the lovely face within. If I stepped inside, I would be that woman again, ageless, forever young. My lips parted with delight as I stepped in front of the mirror. I'm young again. I'm young again. I'm young again. And then the face became that of a dark-haired woman with a twisted visage and wicked black eyes. I reeled backward in shock, just as Bloody Mary reached out of the mirror with claws. her hands and grabbed my cheeks. I felt her nails bite into me as she dragged me toward her. The mirror burst into flames, and I felt my hair burning, my skin blackening. The whole world spun around me in an agony of pain. Mine, you are mine, a woman's evil voice hissed in my ears. Suddenly, a pair of strong arms clamped around my middle and pulled me backward out of the mirror. The woman within screamed and lashed out, her sharp nails scraping all the way down to my chin before they released me. Thomas carried me, sobbing and bleeding profusely, through the front door. "We are leaving right now," he said grimly, cradling me against him as I bled all over his shirt. I could smell smoke in our clothes, and half my hair had been burnt away. From somewhere over my shoulder, a man's voice called, "It looks like you folks could use a hand. Hi, Vicky." I wiped blood from my throbbing cheeks and raised my head to look for the source of the voice. A jolly-faced, dark-eyed stranger wearing overalls and a farmer's straw hat stood beside a truck that was parked in front of our house. Thomas's arms tightened around me. "Not sure there's anything you can do for us, mister, but thanks for asking." "I'm not so sure about that," said the stranger, shrewdly eyeing the blood dripping down both our faces. "My name's Gansmuller. My sister-in-law sold you an antique mirror about a week ago." I gasped and then gestured for Thomas to put me down. "She wasn't supposed to sell the mirror," the farmer continued. "One of my kids swiped it from the old chest a couple of months ago and used it to frighten his sister." "Hey, Jujubes, there you are." "Oh, I love you too. You're up early." "Glad you're here to listen. Maybe I can help you fall asleep." Guys, that's Judy with an I, Jujube. "The kids dropped it in the antiques barn and couldn't find it when I sent them to retrieve it. We reckon a shopper must have found it and put it on that shelf. When you brought it to the register, my sister-in-law thought we'd finally come to our senses and decided to sell the cursed thing. Mr. Gansmuller handed me his bandana to press against my bloody cheeks. We tracked down your name and address from your credit card receipt, and I came to ask if you would sell it back to us," he said. To tell the truth, I really wanted to check to make sure that you're all right. There's a curse on that mirror, and you have to handle it properly to keep the dark spirit contained. It should never have gone out of the family." We are not all right. We are not all right, I said, my voice shaken all to pieces. "I want that mirror out of my house right now. Can you do that?" "Ma'am, I can, and I'll put your money back on your credit card right away." Mr. Gansmuller added, "Where is the hand mirror now?" Thomas described its location and then helped me over to a garden bench by the flower bed. We sat huddled together as Mr. Gansmuller vanished into our cursed house. A moment later, we heard a thump. A silent scream blew our hair away from our faces in a mighty draft of evil anger. The whole house shook. For a moment, we smelled smoke and brimstone. and the windows in the living room flashed so bright that we had to close our eyes against the glare. Then silence returned. I was still seeing bright spots when Mr. Gansmuller emerged from the house with the silver hand mirror in hand. He was a mess, hair disheveled and clothes black with soot. There were scratches on his bare forearms and one on his chin. Thomas rose to his feet in alarm and called to him. Gansmuller limped over to the garden bench and said, "I'm afraid the living room is an unholy mess, but the spirit is back in the mirror. It's safe to go inside." "Are you all right?" I asked, staring in alarm from his white face to his glowing mirror clutched in his hand. "I'll be fine, ma'am," Gansmuller said, "once I get this mirror back home where it belongs." "Thank you for rescuing us," Thomas said, pulling me to my feet and hugging me close. We watched as Mr. Gansmuller got into his truck and drove away with Bloody Mary's mirror. "I think we should stop by St. Catherine's and ask Father Schubert to come pray over our house before we go back inside," Thomas said. "I think that's a very good idea," I said. Our cat appeared for the first time in days, oozing out from under a hydrangea bush and rubbing against my leg. I took this as a hopeful sign. I picked him up, and the three of us got in our car and drove straight to the church to talk to Father Schubert. Okay, guys. Let's go to bed for now. I'm gonna get to bed too. Tina Bina, no. Carolyn's gonna be mad. She's gonna be like, "You gotta have that new sleep schedule." Okay, I'll do one more story, okay? That's it. Or I'll just look here and stare at you. How about that? Just stare. Okay, I'm going to do one more. The bloody handkerchief. One more to fall asleep by. The bloody handkerchief, chapter 20. He killed my daughter. The master just murdered my only child. The words rang through Jack's mind as the voodoo man knelt on the floor beside Joe's body. His daughter lay like a battered rag doll at the foot of the drinks cabinet in a pool of her own blood. Jack dragged his shocked gaze from Joe and looked at the occupants of the fancy dining room table. The master sat at one end, his wife at the other. A son and daughter sat on either side. Wife, son, and daughter stared aghast at the serving girl lying on the floor, blood still dripping from a huge dent in her right temple. At the head of the table, the master glared irritably at the dying girl and said, "Take the useless baggage out of here." She spilled gravy all over the tablecloth. Jack gazed in disbelief at the small gravy stain by the master's plate. All of this anger, this unthinking violence, because of a tiny spill. Beside him, Joe's lips parted. She gave a soft moan and then died right there on the floor. "And clean up that blood," the master shouted at Jack, waving the heavy ladle he used to bash in the side of Joe's head. Oh, this is a real pleasant one to fall asleep to. Hi, John. Hi, John Wasaki. Nice to have you here. Jack's lips thinned with anger. The voodoo man wanted to leap to his feet and attack the murdering master right there and then. Then his eyes fell on the pungent puddle of Joe's warm blood, and a thought struck him. Why should he give the master a quick death? That would be too easy. Oh, I'm liking where he's going with this. Jack pulled out his white handkerchief and carefully wiped up every drop of his beloved daughter's blood. Then he carefully carried her out of the dining room and took her to her stunned mother to prepare for burial. Back in the plantation house, he could hear the master shouting for the butler to bring more gravy and berating his poor wife for not eating. Jack fingered the bloody handkerchief in his pocket and smiled. In his tiny slave cabin, he watched his wife tenderly wash and dress their dead daughter's corpse while he assembled the objects needed for a voodoo spell of vengeance. On the table, he placed black candles, a cow's brain, and 9 cayenne peppers. Finally, he put the white handkerchief, still damp with his precious daughter's blood, beside the rest, and prepared himself mentally and physically for the ritual ahead. A week after the murder, Jack stole into the front yard at dusk and dropped a piece of the bloody handkerchief in front of a plantation cat. The frisky feline pounced on the handkerchief and batted it this way and that across the lawn. Inside the house, the master's wife giggled suddenly and started batting at the air with her hands. She leapt from her chair and pounced on an invisible spot on the floor. Ooh, that's creepy. Outside in the yard, the wind grabbed the handkerchief and blew it up and down and all around. Inside the house, the wife whirled around and around, chasing something invisible up and down the length of the parlor, while her googly-eyed children watched in amazement. They could hear her purring. Ooh. Hearing the commotion, the master strode into the room and frowned at his wife's antics. "Stop that, Matilda," he shouted. His wife whirled and hissed. Then she lashed out at him, fingers extended like claws. Her nails raked down his cheek, leaving bloody scratches behind. She hunched her back and ran from the room with a yowl. Out in the yard, the cat yowled in sympathy and ran for the barn. Her searching husband found wife and cat crouched together in the hayloft. Neither would come down until he left the barn. I'm sorry it's got that reflection. You can still make it out. It is creepy, isn't it, Element? Yeah, and there's another book that I'm getting, the Black-Eyed Children. During the course of the next month, the master's wife grew more feral with each passing day. She purred and rubbed lovingly against her children, but fiercely attacked her husband whenever he drew near. In despair, the master had his wife placed in an asylum. Jack watched from the door of his slave cabin as a closed carriage carried his former mistress down the oak-lined driveway and out of sight. Then he went to the special carved box where he kept objects used in his voodoo religion and removed a second piece of the bloody handkerchief. At dusk, he went to the stable and buried the handkerchief in the straw under the hoof of an ornery brute of a mule that the master kept for pulling his carts. The mule lifted its foot to kick the voodoo man, thought better of it, and put back its ears instead. At the master's dining room table, the son threw back his head and brayed. The master's head whipped around. "Theodore, stop that," he shouted. The son knocked over his chair and trotted out of the room on all fours as the master and his daughter stared wide-eyed after the boy. The master threw down his napkin and raced after his son. He was kicked in the stomach as soon as he exited the door. He tumbled backward onto his backside, and his son kicked him again in the privates. The master gasped and curled up in sudden agony. His son kicked him a third time in the back and trotted outside. When he had recovered enough to limp after his son, the master found the boy in the stall with the ornery mule, calmly eating hay. The son kicked the master in the left leg when he approached the stall, and the mule kicked him in the right. The master was forced to leave his son in the barn. The daughter, who was the only one who could approach the boy, She had to put a halter and lead on him before he would leave the barn. When the son stopped next to the cart and tried to step between the traces, the master covered his face with his hands in despair. 2 weeks later, the son was loaded into the asylum's closed carriage, kicking and braying madly as he strained against his lead line. Jack watched his antics from the door of his cabin. Kind of creepy. I mean, it's funny, but at the same time, in a way, picturing this kid doing this, but it's creepy too. At dusk, the voodoo man climbed a tree beside the house and dropped a piece of bloody handkerchief into a raven's nest. A moment later, the raven returned to the tree, cawing in indignation when it found an invader in its home. 10 minutes after that, the third floor window opened and the daughter of the house climbed up onto the roof. Alicia. Perched on a gable, she stuck her head under her arm and fell asleep. At dawn the next morning, the master was awakened by a soprano cawing outside his bedroom window. It did not sound like the gravel tone caw of a crow. It sounded like the voice of a young girl pretending to be a crow. The panicked master threw off his covers and raced outside. On the gabled roof, his daughter flapped her arms and cawed to the sunrise, shaking her flaxen curls to prune them in the light of the new day. Beside him, a large raven ruffled its feathers and blinked lazily down at the master. "Serena, come down," the master begged in a defeated tone, his face gray with pain. Then he realized the foolishness of this request. "No, Serena, I take that back. Stay right there. Do not try to fly." The master ran toward the barn to fetch a ladder. Behind him, the raven launched itself into the air, cawing joyfully. Serena cawed, too, and flapped her arms. The master whirled in panic when he heard the raven's caw and hurtled back toward the house. Before his eyes, Serena fell in slow motion toward the hard ground. It was dusk a few days later when the townsfolk gathered in the family cemetery at the back of the plantation. The minister spoke solemn words over the newest grave and threw a few clumps of soil onto the coffin. One by one, the mourners followed suit. The master stood weeping beside the new headstone as his slaves filled in the grave. Within the space of 2 months, he had lost his entire family. The funeral party departed in ones and twos, leaving the master alone with his grief. As the master knelt beside the newly filled grave, a sympathetic hand pressed against his shoulder. He glanced up into the voodoo man's dark eyes. "I know what it's like to lose a daughter," Jack said, and walked solemnly away. Behind him, the master frowned at the audacity of this negative reminder and impatiently brushed a piece of bloody handkerchief from the shoulder of his coat. At the edge of the woods, a large wolf, just a minute. At the edge of the woods, a large black wolf lifted its muzzle and sniffed the air. It smelled blood. The wolf howled once to alert his pack and then trotted into the cemetery. Beside the grave, the master threw back his head and howled back. The end. And that's it, guys, for the night. Thanks for coming to listen. And y'all have a good night or day, wherever it is for you. Anybody watching in the replay, I hope you enjoy the stories and you have fun and go to sleep. Thanks, guys. See you tomorrow at Carolyn's, okay? Bye, guys. Bye, John, Tina, Leslie, LMN, Steph, Karen, Tina, Adventures with Beth, my Alicia. I think Danielle's already asleep. And I think Moo might be asleep. Night, guys.